Hello and welcome for tutorial video number 2 for the Citation 10 in X-Plane 12. And in the last one we started up the engines, prepared the airplane for taxiing, and this one will show you how to taxi for departure, take off and climb out to your cruise altitude. We're waiting for this guy to pass, and then we will extend the flaps. We choose to take off with flaps 15. You can use a mouse or an assigned button, and you see that the slats extend, they turn orange then white. You see the flaps move, and there's a little green arc here on the trim arc indicator, and you can see that it moves with the selected flap setting, and that also the trim indicator itself turns green once it's in the allowed takeoff range. And I turned it to -6.5, a little more nose up, because my center of gravity is fairly far forward. I'm turning on the ATC transponder to altitude, will not transmit altitude on the ground anyway, and then I turn on the taxi light and let's get going. We release the parking brake, and you can see the airplane starts moving even without adding any thrust. That's normal for a jet engine aircraft and also some props. And you test the nose wheel steering, and of course you also test the brakes. And if you have trouble judging your ground speed, you can see it right there. Sometimes it's easy to go too fast, and it shows right there on the screen how fast you go. A good speed in turns is 10 to 15 knots, and then once you go on a straight stretch of taxiway, you can speed up to maybe 30 knots. But of course, the faster you go, the more you need to pay attention to stay on the center line, and any slow or small steering error will take you towards the edge really fast. Be careful with your thrust on the ground. I would not go to more than 40% N1. You always want to make sure that you don't hurt or damage anything with your jet blast. I'm going to test the reversers now, and just pop them open a tiny bit until those lights come on. Here you can see them deploy. The green deploy light is on. And now you want to check the auto stow. You flip these to stow emergency and check that the reverser stow, that the arm light stays on. You close them, check that the arm light stays on. It does, and then you can switch these back to normal. And that checked the auto stow function for the reversers. That's a very dangerous thing. If the reversers should deploy during flight, it causes some bad accidents, and you want to make sure that you can close them. Another important thing, we're on VOR1 still for the navigation system. We switched that to FMS because we want to fly the departure that we put into the FMS with the autopilot nav function. And if you don't switch it to FMS, then it will just try to track the VOR, which is also possible, of course, but we want to fly it in lateral navigation, and that's why you need to switch it to FMS. Coming up on the first intersection here, we're not taking this one. I think it's called Echo. Try to always maximize your runway use. Normally we calculate the intersection that is not the last one, but the one before that. There might always be an airplane stuck on the last one that can't quite go yet, and you don't want to be stuck behind that one. So we calculated takeoff performance for this intersection here, and we'll turn in and then stop just at the whole short line to prepare for lineup. When you line up an aircraft, a couple things that you always have to do. The first thing is check that, or actually what we're doing here is we'll turn off on our pitot static. You don't want to run that more than 2 minutes on the ground, so just before takeoff is a good time. We don't need engine anti-ice right now. We'll turn on the strobe lights, and we'll also turn off the taxi light and turn on the landing lights. You normally do this just as you get takeoff clearance, but we'll do it now so that it's out of the way. And of course, before you line up, you always check for airplanes on approach or on takeoff roll or landing roll. Runway is clear, so we can go. And you might notice that I'm not reading any checklists here. The real Citation has the checklists programmed electronically into the MFDs, you can call them up with that panel there on the left bottom side, but that's not implemented here. And I really don't have any checklists. I always joke with my co-pilot saying that checklists are for bad pilots only, which is of course not true. But since I don't have any, I can't read any, and I'm just following the POH and try to not omit any steps. Now we line up with the center line. Lining up aircraft is an art in itself, especially if they're big. The Citation here is not so horrible, and also the runway is so long that wasting a few meters is no big deal. The wind is from the left, so before I take off I will deflect the yoke to the left to counter this wind. Right here I advance thrust to about 40%, make sure the engines spool up simultaneously, and then just pull it all the way forward. That's the takeoff position. You can see the ITT turn orange, that's fine. And you'll see the plane wants to weather vane into the wind. Acceleration is very brisk, and the whole takeoff is a rapid thing. V1 rotate, and you pull up. You can pull up to 25 degrees with an airplane this light. There's no rush to get the gear up. Power is ample, and the thing rockets into the sky. You see that we top out at about 145 knots here, which is way faster than V2. But unless you pull up brutally during rotation, that's you can barely avoid that. And I'm going back to climb power, turn on the autopilot, it engages in roll and pitch, and immediately I turn on the nav button, and you can see it goes to L nav, which makes it follow the magenta route. And I also select the pitch mode, flight level change, so I can set the speed. And we're already at 4,000 feet, so I'm setting 180 knots to pitch down, start the acceleration. Once you're above 170, you can just raise the flaps, and you can do it at once or in smaller steps. I'm doing it with one step here to flaps 5, increase the speed a little further. You can see the maximum speeds on the speed table, just passing maximum for flaps 35. So you still see we still have plenty of distance, or we're still at a safe speed to not overspeed the flaps. And now I raise them all the way. Make sure that you raise them all the way to up, not leave the slats extended by accident. We're coming up on the 7,000 feet that we set for departure. You can hear the beep there alerting us that it's 1,000 feet to go. I'm reducing thrust to make the plane not climb so steeply. You don't want to rocket up to your altitude. There may be another aircraft above you that would get a TCAS alert. And I'm still doing 2,000 feet per minute, which is a little too high. But I'm sure that there's no airplane above us here because I haven't set up any AI aircraft. Now you can see that the plane does not track perfectly, and that's the way it happens in real life too. The limit here for the departure turn is 200 knots, and it still left the turn, but that's what you would see in a real aircraft as well. They don't always follow precisely on the routing. I'm accelerating, and I set flight level 170 now, going back to flight level change, setting climb power again, and climbing up. The speed is still set to 226. I roll that up to 250. The speed limit below 8,000 feet is 280. Airplane wise, they do it for strength of the windshield. Turning on the engine anti-ice here because we're crossing some clouds. You can see the REM air temperature below the ITT scale there. It's at 10 degrees and getting colder, so below 10 degrees you always want to turn on engine anti-ice when you're in clouds. And as I said, 280 is the limit, 250 is the ATC speed limit, usually below 10,000 feet here in Europe. So now that we're above 10,000, I can increase speed further. I'll turn off the landing lights. We're in airspace Charlie now. There shouldn't be any uncontrolled traffic around. And when you pass 10,000 feet, that's a good reminder to turn off the APU. We did not need it, fortunately, to help us restarting engines. So turn off the bleed and hold the stop button until you can see the RPM spin down. Keep holding it until you're below maybe 60% or so, then you can let it go and the APU shuts down. And once it's wound down sufficiently, you can later turn it off. I'm switching the altitude scale to standard. You can just click the standard button, that's pretty convenient. And you can can see the APU is almost shut down. So we'll turn off the master switch, and that's done. Okay, we're past the worst, I would say. We'll turn off the engine anti-ice because there are no more clouds, or the clouds are below us. Select the good range on the map display so you can see what's going on and what the next steps are. We're approaching level 170, and again reducing thrust to bring back the climb rate a little bit. And of course the Citation does not have an auto throttle, so you always need to be careful when you approach the altitude. The plane will level off and then start accelerating fairly rapidly unless you retard the throttles by yourself or set an appropriate N1 rating. About 80% is good, a little less when you're lower like we are now, 75%, and if you're higher a little more, maybe 82, 85%, and that should get you into the ballpark for now. Let's climb to level 410 to get above the airline riffraff, and go back to climb power, and then climb out to level 410 starts. I dialed up the speed to 310. The Citation is a fast airplane. People want to go fast and quickly where they want to go, so don't linger around, and you certainly don't want anyone to tell you that you're in the way. Turn on the fan synchronization, and that makes the fans get synchronized automatically. It's good for passenger comfort. It avoids some unpleasant effects when they're almost at the same RPM but not quite. We release the fasten seatbelt switches. Austin is too busy working, he doesn't even notice. Of course you don't want to do that when your pitch is very high, but see, it's below 7 degrees now, and that's a good time to turn off the seatbelt signs. I'm setting the bank limiter here. We don't want to do the steep turns when people walk around in the cabin, and that limits the autopilot to about 15 degrees of bank. And you can see with a fairly tight turn like we're trying to do now towards the next waypoint, that really makes the plane go off the route. Right here, it's maybe not that important, but if you're maneuvering in the area of an airport or so, then you do not want to do that just for passenger comfort, because ATC wouldn't be happy if you stray too far from your route. They do calculate with a plane on LNAV not making the turns perfectly tight, but if you go like 5 miles off track, then they would probably ask you where you're going exactly. Now watch the Mach number as we climb. We have set an indicated airspeed of 310 knots, and you can see the Mach number is climbing slowly. The speed of sound gets slower as we climb because the air gets colder, and if you don't pay attention, then you will overspeed the airplane as you go higher and higher into the Mach regime. And we want to climb out with 310 knots first, and then switch over to decimal 0.8 Mach. So we just have to climb until we get there. And since nothing really happens during the climb, we can fast forward now to the point where we switch over to 0.8. Okay, here we are. Let's zoom into the primary flight display. We hit 0.8 Mach, and now it's time to change over. Click the CO changeover button, and you can see that the speed, the commanded speed, changes to a Mach number, and just as before, you can use the nose down, nose up switches to set the speed that you want to fly. And we'll climb out at Mach 0.80 now. You will actually see that the plane pitches up slightly to maintain this Mach number. As I said before, the speed of sound gets slower as you climb up, so the plane needs to fly slower and slower to maintain the same Mach number, the fraction of the speed of sound. We're flying at 80% of the speed of sound now, and you can see the indicated airspeed is actually rolling back slightly now, going 299, 298, and so on. And now we can forward again until we approach flight level 410. Okay, here we are again, and now we're approaching flight level 410. You can see that the climb rate is still very brisk with 1200 feet per minute, and one difference is now that we approach flight level 410 at cruising level, we don't reduce thrust immediately. We'll leave it set to climb and use that excess thrust for acceleration. Now, the curious thing is that the higher you fly, the closer these thrust ratings are together. So you will see that if you set cruise thrust, it's pretty much the same as climb thrust. There'll be another update to the Citation later on where this changes a little bit, where cruise thrust will then be pretty much the maximum thrust that you can set to fly the maximum forward airspeed. It's not easy to overspeed your aircraft anymore. Right now it is, so you want to pay attention as you accelerate, but you can see acceleration is fairly slow. We're at decimal 8.4 now, and if you talk about cruise speeds for the Citation, yes, it can go 0.9, but of course that uses a lot of fuel, and if you want to save fuel, go very far, you'll need to fly considerably lower than that, maybe 0.79, 78, and we're doing 8.4 now, which is a good medium speed. And if you want to maintain that speed, you need to juggle your N1 very carefully. You can see me experiment there. I'm going back to 8.4. That was not enough. I saw the speed go down, so I'm now going back to 8.6, and that makes my speed go up slightly, so I reduce it just a tiny bit, and then enter an area of speed stability where speed may go up to 251, 252 indicated, but then just top out, and I can cruise and enjoy the scenery. And I'll see you back hopefully for the next tutorial.